The courtroom was silent in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't the usual hush that fell over the audience before Judge Judy entered. It was heavier, like everyone sensed something was already wrong, something that didn't match the small, trembling presence seated at the plaintiff's table. Emily Turner, just 14 years old, sat with both hands clasped tightly in her lap, her shoulders curled inward as though she was trying to make herself disappear. Beside her sat her mother, Sarah, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes kept darting between her daughter and the parking officer on the opposite side of the room, as if she still couldn't believe that all of this courtroom, these cameras, this moment, was happening because of him. Across from them sat Officer Daniel Price, arms crossed over his chest, posture wide and confident, expression carved from pure indifference. To anyone who didn't know the story, he looked like someone simply doing his job. To those who actually read the case file, he looked like a man who had forgotten what his badge was supposed to stand for. When he met Sarah's eyes across the room, he actually smirked. That tiny curl of arrogance was enough to make a ripple of discomfort pass through the audience. And then the door behind the bench opened. Judge Judy walked in slow, steady steps, each one echoing just loud enough for the tension to thicken. She placed her folder on the bench, but she didn't open it. Instead, she stared at the two parties in a long, unbroken line of scrutiny before letting out a breath that sounded clipped with irritation. It wasn't directed at the child. It wasn't directed at the mother. Her eyes slid directly to Officer Price. And when she looked at him, still leaning back, still half smirking, her entire expression sharpened. It was the look that told the room she had already seen something in the file that disturbed her. But she didn't speak right away. She turned to the young girl instead. "State your name," Judy said gently, but her voice carried the authority of someone who would not tolerate even a whisper of dishonesty. "Emily Turner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How old are you, Emily?" 14. Her answer was small. But the moment the word left her mouth, Judy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 14, Judy repeated, like the number itself was an accusation aimed at the man who had written the ticket. "All right. Let's get into it." But before the facts were even spoken out loud, the narrator inside every viewer's mind was already screaming the truth: nothing about this case was normal. A child was sitting in a courtroom over a ticket she didn't even understand. A mother had been financially strangled by what should have been a simple misunderstanding. And a parking officer, whose job was supposedly to keep order, not create chaos, had doubled down on a decision that made absolutely no sense. The tension in the room felt like it was mirroring what had been happening in Emily's life for weeks, pressure building and building until something finally snapped. But Judge Judy didn't rush. She didn't give in to emotion. She didn't even open the folder yet. She simply asked the first question with startling calm. "Mrs. Turner, why are you here today?" Sarah swallowed, and when she spoke, her voice wavered. "Your Honor, my daughter got a parking ticket while she was waiting for me. She didn't break any law. She wasn't driving. She was just sitting in the car, doing what I told her to do. And the ticket," her breath caught, "the ticket caused more damage to us than you can imagine." And with those words, something about Judy's posture shifted. She leaned forward, elbows on the bench, hands clasped tightly. "A ticket issued to a child," she murmured, her eyes flicking to the officer again. "Let's be crystal clear before we proceed. A 14-year-old was in the driver's seat?" "No, Your Honor," Emily whispered. "I was in the passenger seat. The car was off. I wasn't even touching anything." "And you were alone?" "Yes." "Your mother told you to stay put?" "Yes." "And you followed instructions?" "Yes." "For questions?" "For answers." But the entire room could feel it. Judge Judy had already seen the truth. She'd already read the citation. She'd already reviewed the officer's notes. And something in that paperwork had set off an alarm loud enough to drag this case out of the administrative black hole it was originally buried in and into national attention. Finally, Slowly, Judy opened the folder. She didn't even look at the papers yet. She simply stared at the thick stack of documents and said, almost to herself but loud enough for everyone to hear, "This case is not about a ticket. It's about judgment. And what I'm seeing so far is that a 14-year-old child was punished for trying to stay safe while an adult failed to use basic common sense." Her eyes snapped back to Officer Price. "And I am going to find out why." The audience leaned in. Emily held her breath. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. And for the first time since the case began, the officer's smirk slipped. Everything was about to change. To understand why Judge Judy's entire demeanor hardened the moment she saw Emily sitting in that courtroom, you have to rewind to the night everything went wrong. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't the kind of night where disasters feel inevitable. It was just an ordinary Tuesday that slowly spiraled into the kind of moment that exposes how fragile life becomes when the smallest decisions collide with the wrong authority at the wrong time. Sarah Turner had already been running behind schedule. Her shift at the diner ended late because a coworker didn't show up, and she couldn't leave until the last few tables were cleaned and the receipts were counted. By the time she finally clocked out, the sky was already dark, and the November air had dropped into the kind of cold that seeps through thin jackets and tired bones. Emily was in the passenger seat, doing homework under the faint glow of the dashboard, trying her best not to worry her mother with how exhausted she looked. They were both tired in the way only people who live paycheck to paycheck truly understand. But they still had one more stop before going home. The grocery store. Sarah needed two things, milk and headache medicine. Nothing complicated. Nothing time-consuming. She knew if she didn't get those items tonight, the morning would turn into a battle. No milk for Emily's breakfast, no medicine for the pounding behind her eyes, no energy to get through a day she already dreaded. The parking lot was unusually full when they arrived. Delivery trucks blocked half the spaces, and the rest were packed with people doing their evening runs. Sarah circled twice, hoping for a spot closer to the entrance so Emily wouldn't have to walk in the cold. But nothing opened up, and after checking her watch, knowing they still had homework, laundry, and dishes waiting at home, she made a quick decision. "Stay here, sweetheart," she told Emily gently. "It'll be faster. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'll only be a few minutes." This was not unusual for them. Emily didn't like going inside crowded stores at night, especially when she was tired. Sarah always told her it was safer to wait in the locked car rather than wander a noisy store alone. It was one of those protective routines single mothers develop out of necessity and love. Over the next month, things got worse. Sarah couldn't afford to pay the ticket immediately, which triggered a late fee. Then an administrative processing fee. Then the bank overdraft when one of the fees hit earlier than she expected. That overdraft triggered another penalty. By the end of the cycle, the original $150 ticket had ballooned into over $300 in charges. Emily overheard everything, every frustrated sigh, every whispered curse, every late-night calculator session. She could see her mother's stress wearing her down. The guilt became unbearable. She apologized constantly for things that weren't her fault. She withdrew in school. She avoided her friends. She stopped drawing, stopped laughing, stopped acting like the child she was supposed to be. The night Sarah found her daughter crying under her blanket, repeating, "I messed everything up," was the moment she knew something had to change. She couldn't let Emily carry the weight of an adult's mistake. So when a coworker overheard her crying on the phone and told her, "You need to take this to someone who isn't afraid to actually use common sense, send this to Judge Judy," Sarah didn't laugh it off this time. She sent the whole file, the ticket, the rejection letters, the explainers, even pictures of the curb and the half-hidden sign. And when she got the call from Judge Judy's producers saying they wanted the case, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. By the time Sarah and Emily walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, they had no idea that the case file sitting on the bench was not the same file they'd originally submitted. They didn't know that while they waited nervously for their hearing date, Judge Judy's research team had been working quietly behind the scenes, cross-checking records, reviewing municipal codes, and pulling citation histories that no mother struggling through two jobs would ever have time to investigate. But Judy wasn't a clerk or an administrator. She was a judge who had spent her entire life reading between the lines of stories that didn't add up. And from the moment this case landed on her desk, she knew something wasn't just wrong, it was rotten. The moment Sarah finished her opening explanation, the courtroom could feel Judy sharpen. It wasn't a dramatic shift, it was tiny, precise. Her eyebrows tightened a fraction of an inch. Her fingers tapped once on the stack of papers in front of her. Her voice, when she finally addressed Officer Price, carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had already discovered something damning. "Officer Price," Judy began, her tone dangerously neutral, "I have some questions for you." He tried to sit a little straighter, tried to hold on to the composure he brought into the courtroom, shoulders back, chin up, the posture of someone used to having the final say. But there was a flicker in his eyes, barely visible, when he realized Judy was not just reading his notes. She was reading everything. She reached into the file and pulled out a sheet marked with colored tabs. "This is the citation you wrote to Emily Turner. According to your notes, the driver refused to move the vehicle. Correct?" Officer Price nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you stand by that?" "Yes." Judy leaned in. "The driver you spoke to was 14 years old. That is the driver you are referring to in this document." The officer hesitated, not enough for a normal person to notice, but enough for the viewers, enough for the audience, enough for Judy. Yes. I mean, the person in the car refused to move." "The person in the car was a child," Judy snapped, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "A child who legally cannot operate a vehicle. A child who cannot move a car even if she wanted to. Yet you documented her refusal as though she were an adult driver capable of making that decision." He tried to recover. "Well, Your Honor, the law doesn't say anything about age. A car can't be standing in a no-standing zone." Judy stared at him, long, cold, unblinking. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. "Officer Price," she finally said, "I'm going to give you an opportunity to correct yourself. Because either you didn't understand what you were writing, or you deliberately falsified part of this citation because you didn't want to admit you had ticketed a minor. Which one is it?" His jaw tensed. "I followed protocol." "Ah. The famous refuge of people who've stopped thinking." Judy didn't even bother hiding her disdain. She flipped another page. "Your protocol also appears to include writing nearly identical language on 32 other citations issued in the same curb zone over the last 3 months. She held up 3 more sheets. "All written within time windows that suggest you issued some of them 30 seconds apart. Can you explain how you walked to each car, evaluated its situation, attempted to speak to the driver, and documented their alleged refusal in under a minute?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Officer Price's face flushed. "I'm efficient, Your Honor." Judy laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief wrapped in rage. "Efficient? That's one word. Reckless is another. Careless. Incompetent. Choose whichever one sits best with you." She tapped the papers. "Because what I see here is a pattern. A pattern of writing as many citations as possible in a high-yield zone without actually engaging with the people affected. And in Emily Turner's case, that pattern crossed a line." Emily lowered her eyes, shoulders tight. Even now, even as Judy spoke with fire on her behalf, she still felt the weight of that terrible night pressing against her chest. But Judy wasn't finished. She turned to the mother. "Mrs. Turner, how long were you inside the store?" 7 minutes, Sarah answered, voice steady. "I checked the receipt time. I only needed milk and headache medicine. And the car was off the entire time." "Yes, Your Honor." "And your daughter, 14 years old, was alone, following your instructions? Yes. Judy slammed the file closed. The sound snapped through the room like a slap. Officer Price, she said, voice low but terrifyingly clear, you ticketed a child. You misdocumented her as a driver. You failed to note that she was a minor alone in a locked vehicle. You wrote the citation as though you had been dealing with a capable adult who defied you, when in reality, you were intimidating a frightened girl who didn't even know if she was allowed to open the door. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. But Judy wasn't giving him room to breathe. You didn't follow protocol. You didn't follow common sense. And you certainly didn't follow decency. The audience sat frozen. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Emily looked directly at Judge Judy for the first time, her expression shifting from fear to a delicate, fragile hope. And Officer Price, the man who walked in smirking, was now shrinking under the weight of a truth he could no longer outrun. And Judy was just getting started. The air inside the courtroom felt charged, as if everyone present could feel the pressure rising toward a breaking point. Officer Price shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clinging to whatever scraps of authority he still believed he had. Emily sat small and quiet, her hands clasped tightly together, trembling. Sarah leaned forward slightly, bracing herself for whatever came next. But nobody, not the audience, not the officer, not even the camera crew, was ready for what Judge Judy revealed next. Because up until this point, Judy had only scratched the surface. She opened the file again, but this time she didn't pull out citation records or municipal codes. She pulled out something else, something heavier. A document marked with bold black letters that made Officer Price's face drain of color the moment he recognized it. Internal Affairs. Officer Price, Judy began, voice low and deadly calm, before you came into this courtroom, did you assume I only had your citation report to go on? He swallowed hard. I followed the law, Your Honor. Wonderful, Judy said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Then this next part should be very easy for you to explain. She held up a page. Are you familiar with complaint #427B involving you and a citation issued to a single mother last month? A visible jolt ran through him. That issue was unresolved. Judy's lips pressed into a thin, razor-sharp line. Unresolved, she repeated. Yes. That's one word. The other word is ignored. A hush fell over the room. According to this report, Judy continued, tapping the paper, you issued a $325 ticket to a disabled mother who was unloading groceries. She had a disability placard, which you claim you did not see. That case was flagged because your body camera was mysteriously turned off. She leaned forward. Much like it was the night you ticketed Emily Turner. Another gasp rippled through the gallery. Officer Price had no words. Judy didn't stop. And this, she said, lifting the next sheet, is complaint #322C. A delivery driver. You wrote him a no-standing citation while he was kneeling beside his truck after collapsing from heat exhaustion. That complaint did not resolve in your favor either. Sarah covered her mouth. Emily's eyes widened with disbelief. And then, Judy added, voice rising fractionally with each word, there's complaint #301A, involving a pregnant woman in her third trimester who you cited after she pulled over due to dizziness. Judy stared directly into him. She was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Do you remember that case, Officer Price? He stared ahead, jaw slack, sweat beginning to form at his temples. The courtroom was silent. Everyone could feel the unraveling. Judy set the papers down with deliberate precision. Then she spoke, each word clean, sharp, and final. You have a pattern, Officer Price. A pattern of targeting vulnerable people, women, children, the elderly, the disabled. A pattern of choosing easy victims because you assumed they wouldn't fight back. A pattern of writing citations first and answering questions later. She turned toward Emily. And this child, Judy said, her voice softening but her fury still burning beneath it, was your next easy target. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes beginning to shine. Judy wasn't done. She turned to Sarah. Mrs. Turner, what were the financial consequences of this citation? Sarah clasped her hands. Your Honor. I couldn't afford it. I worked 2 jobs. I already fell behind on rent. When the late fees were added, it became $382. That's nearly a week of groceries for us. Judy's expression hardened. A 14-year-old girl caused none of this. What caused this was reckless enforcement by someone who forgot that a badge is not a weapon. Then she delivered the blow. This court finds the citation void, the fees void, and the officer's conduct unacceptable. Gasps filled the room. But Judy wasn't finished. Officer Price, I am forwarding the details of this case, along with these unresolved complaints, back to Internal Affairs with a judicial recommendation that your conduct be reviewed for disciplinary action. His face collapsed. Your Honor, please. No, Judy cut sharply. You don't get to plead now. You chose power over fairness. You chose intimidation over duty. And you chose a 14-year-old child as your target. Actions, she said, her voice rising with righteous force, have consequences. Emily choked on a sob as Sarah pulled her close. Judy turned to them with warmth that contrasted completely with the fierce storm she had unleashed moments earlier. Emily, she said gently, you did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Emily nodded, tears falling. This was not your fault. It was the kind of sentence a child remembers forever. The courtroom exhaled as though everyone had been holding their breath. Sarah whispered, thank you so much. Judy nodded once. Case dismissed. The gavel struck, once, loud, final. The moment it landed, something beautiful happened. The audience, normally silent until the cameras cut, rose to their feet on instinct. A standing ovation. For a frightened 14-year-old girl. For a mother who never stopped fighting. But most importantly, for justice. Emily hid her face in her mother's shoulder, overwhelmed. Sarah mouthed the words thank you over and over. And Judge Judy? She didn't smile. She didn't pose. She simply sat back with the calm certainty of a woman who had done what she was put on this earth to do, protect those who couldn't protect themselves.